distributional measures, summary measures. I think these now say two things which are very clearly, and I just want to reiterate. Number of data points are now saying India is the country with, India is among the country with the highest inequality. If you look at the countries with the highest inequality, India is sitting very pretty in terms of wealth inequality, income inequality, and everything. This is coming out from income inequality numbers from IHDS. So just look at pure survey numbers. You are looking at this kind of analysis using the fiscal numbers and tax numbers, or you're looking at wealth numbers. So that is an inescapable. So let's get this out of our mind that we are a low inequality country. Second, India is a unique country except for few countries, and these you can count on fingers, where inequality has increased in the last 15 years secularly, whereas many other countries with a high inequality have seen a decline or some kind of stability on inequality. And the third question that was there on, the point I wanted to answer was Radhika's question, which is an interesting question that you asked. Why is it that it is flattening out? And that flattening is basically happening from 2009 to 2013. And it is happening because of 3-4 factors. One of this is a period 2008 onwards, later half of 2008 onwards, coinciding with somewhere around September, around that, is when casual wages start rising. And the casual wages are rising at the fastest rate up to 2013, around 6% in real terms, or 7% in real terms. So that's one contribution. And you also see some kind of a increase in non-farm diversification in construction and various other sectors. And the third factor is increase in redistributive transfers, which is after 2007 onwards, where states go into strengthening public distribution system, NREGA, and various other things. Now that is why I was saying that what happened was that the bottom income, the bottoms is 30%, 40%, really saw an increase in numbers, and that is what is also saw a decline in poverty, and meant that the inequality was not rising. It didn't decline, but at least the top 1% share remained stagnant. Some redistribution in the remaining 99%. That's it.
Okay, let's do a second round, and perhaps this will be, my God, there are so many questions. Okay, let's start from the right here, and then we'll move to the left. We'll get everybody. May I request the panelists to make note of the question, then we can continue the discussion over lunch.
Thank you so much for a really fascinating presentation and discussion. I'm Nisha from Oxfam. In addition to now, Himanshu, as you say, establishing that we are one of the most unequal countries in the world, whether it's on income and wealth, Oxfam also does a report which ranks all countries on their commitment to reducing inequality. So we look at progressive taxation policies, health and education, expenditures on public health and education, and then some social protection. And India is at the bottom. This is also a very unique combination to say we are one of the most unequal countries in the world and we are willing to do the least about it. How does one explain that complete lack of political will, political commitment, debate, discussion? Is it that we are so unaware of the consequences, the political capture, the social breakdown of social contract, the unsustainability of growth, or is it, somebody said in another conference, we are Indians, we are used to inequality forever on caste and gender, and now this is one more dimension and we just don't care. Where is that change going to come from? You have panels like this of policymakers, and it must be the only country in the world where people still talk about the Kuznets curve, which is long dead and buried everywhere else in the world. So what will create that political will?
Question here.
Thank you.
Yes, I will. We'll come.
Ashok Kathuria, former ambassador. My compliments to Luca for such a comprehensive treatment of this very important subject. I have a very simple, small question from you. Looking at Indian data, what were the challenges you faced? Looking at it and examining it in comparison with other emerging economies. And Sandeep, I have a comment. You did mention the challenge about moving agriculture-based population, agriculture economy dependent population to other sectors of the economy. But I don't think, talking about challenges enough. I think this is one of the most pressing needs of Indian society at present. Unless we do that, I think all panelists will agree, we will be inducing relapse of a very large percentage of our population back into poverty. So we have to do it, and we have to do it fast. Fragmentation of land, we cannot sustain growing population on the existing land. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question right back there. Yes, please. TC, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ranganathan. I'm a banker, but not an investment banker most of the time. I was a public sector banker. It's been a very fascinating debate. One aspect has been, I think, has been missing, though questions have come on that you are ducking the population issue problem. The difference between India and Europe on one hand and China on the other hand, in 1980, India was 600 million. Today, we are 1.35 or something. That means it's doubled in 30 years. China has not grown because it had grown, but not as much because of one-child policy. And France and Germany and UK were almost rates have come down. Now, population growth, if you see from a different studies, takes place mostly on the non-educated, lower income. So whenever the population boom takes place, it happens in the lowest decile onwards, and more in the lower deciles than in the higher deciles. So when you have such a large population growth which has taken place, would it not automatically result, even if there had been no growth, in a significant decline or significant increase in inequality or a significant decline this or there? And will it not worsen as the growth keeps on? Because what happened in the 80s, the rate came down, but it kept on applying on a higher base each year. And the base has gone up now to 1.35. So even if the rate comes down, it's going to even explode further. So all this talk of redistribution, how much redistribution can you do when you're growing so rapidly? And why is everyone ducking that problem? Thank you very much.
Thank you, TCA. So there's so many questions. I think we'll have to do another round. So there's a lady back there, and then I'll come here. Yes.
I'm Indrani Mazumdar from the Center for Women's Development Studies, and I have just two very small questions to Lucas. Can we look forward to gender disaggregated data in the future? And secondly, can we also have a little more idea of the sectoral and occupational aspects of your data itself? If we could have some profile, more greater depth in that, probably it would help us understand things better.
Okay, I'm going to recalibrate the format. We'll do another round. There's so many questions, but so let Luca answer the current, and then we'll do one last round. I promise you.
Thank you very much again for all these questions. So on the data challenges, one common fact in all emerging countries is this large gap between the national accounts and the total income from the surveys. And in India, one of the key difficulty to deal with is the absence of long-term income survey, but it's essentially consumption in the NSSO. So you have to recompute to estimate income inequality from surveys using the consumption benchmark. So this is a particularly challenging task, which we do in a very transparent way in the technical papers which are published online. And we also show that using a lot of different assumptions, the results are robust. Now, the other important data challenge is that tax data only covers the top of the distribution, as you know, in a country like India. And this is precisely why we need to use survey with tax. So it's not like tax would tell us the entire picture or survey cannot be used. We really combine these different data sources. Regarding population growth, of course, it can be an important part of it can be a part of the story. But in my sense, again, there's nothing deterministic. The question is whether you have enough investments in education, in health, to match up population growth among bottom 50%. And the wider the gap in growth in investments. Not in redistribution, but in what we call pre-distribution, right? The distribution of primary, human capital assets, so to say. Whether or not there's a matching between the population growth and the growth in investments. Regarding gender disaggregated data, we're starting to have such essential data for certain countries. including the USA and Europe. And we also show that, if there's one thing on which Europe is not still performing well enough, it's clearly gender inequality, where there's still a very large glass ceiling for women in the top, to access the top 1%, that also Europe needs to do a lot of efforts in this direction. And we will also develop more gender-based estimates in the future, as well as occupational estimates and sectoral estimates. Some of them are already available online on the database that is directed that we relate to in the report.
Thank you. Look, I'll go straight to the last set of questions here. Oh my God, yeah. There are new hands coming up. Yes, please.
Professor Lal, working with Society for Development Studies. I have a small clarification from Lucas' report and a point in support of what Sandeep has mentioned. In the report, somewhere Lucas has said investment in infrastructure for bottom 50% in India is less than China. And this he has related to an inequality. My question is, how did you estimate the investment in infrastructure by income? So that's for Lucas. In support of Sandeep, I'm sure many of you will be knowing, in the entire world, Nigeria is the only country in terms of structural change. It has invested in agriculture heavily for the last 3 decades. It is well documented in one of my latest book, Structural Change and Economic Development. I think we need to follow from Nigeria how they have done. Though some people may say it's the most corrupt country also according to international estimates. But we need to follow from, but your point is very well taken. We need to focus on agriculture.
Thank you, Professor. Can you pass the mic to the person on your right? Yes, please. Thank you.
My name is Gautam Mahajan, and I apologize because I'm not an economist. I work in the area of value creation, and I have 2 separate questions. One is that we are trying to promote entrepreneurship at the bottom of the pyramid. And when we do that, we find that people are really not interested. They're not interested in working. They're not interested in becoming employers. And in fact, we want people to become employers rather than being employable. And those who want to go ahead come to urban areas. So that's one issue where the people at the bottom of the pyramid aren't going to move. The second is, I think, a little bit more serious. And that is, as technology starts to change, the impact in countries like India, who are focusing on catching up, will actually increase the gap. And if the absorption of technology is fast, it will only impact the people at the top of the pyramid, not at the bottom of the pyramid. And therefore, inequality will increase.
Thank you. Divya here, and then we'll go to the left, and then we'll conclude here. Yes.
Hello, I am Divya. I'm working at ICRIER. My question is, how do we tackle this issue? We've been talking about redistribution, but can the focus, especially in the case of India, be moved to pre-distribution, particularly like at the time when new policies are coming up by the current government? How can we align this issue to the process of policy intervention? Thank you.
On the left, we had questions here. No? Okay. Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Please be quick. Yeah? Yes. Thank you.
My question is mainly to Lucas. Now, there has been projected substantial increase in the concentration of wealth in the top, and some benefit is going to the bottom 50% overall and across countries. Now, the middle 40%, there is either decline or stagnations and all these things. Now, as we know, the middle 40% has got increasing proportion of non-labor income as we move up. Now, if there is a concentration of non-labor income at the top, has the process has fastened that it is the non-labor income part of that middle 40% has moved towards, or is it to the decline of the labor income as different theories call about U-shaped kind of a curve. So my question is, and if it has happened, what process? My question is valid to Lucas and also to Dr. Sen.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question behind here. Yes, and there's one back there, and then the last question I'll get from the front.
Hi, I'm Shivangi. I'm a research assistant at ICRIER, and my question is a more general question regarding policy that the world can generally adopt. So there's a general observation that inequality has feedback loops through which it kind of perpetrates itself by increasing the influence of the wealthy capitalists who can then undermine the political and socio-economic systems. So, as we saw in the early 20th century, that inequality continued to increase till major wars erupted, and that sort of slowed down the increase in inequality. So, in the presence of such in the presence of weaknesses internally, which sort of disrupt the continued increase in inequality, does that underscore the importance of international institutions such and sustainable development goals in sort of curbing this in the absence of internal anchors for every country?
Okay. There's a question back there, and then I'll come to Professor Mohan at the end. Yes.
I am R.P. Katyal. I was formerly the head of the National Accounts Division. My question is, we have already mentioned there is no income distribution or income survey for India. No, in the absence of the income survey, and the NSSO has not been able to come up with a methodology that they can carry out the income survey. In the absence of that, your income inequality estimated from the consumption surveys and other surveys is distorted. That is the main question.
Professor.
Dinesh Mohan, I'm an engineer, so I'm a bit confused by one statement that increasing inequality reflects market failure. Or is it market success? Any of you can answer that it's really successful, the market.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I will come to Luca last, because let him have the last word since it's his report, and I'd give the floor to the panelists if they wish to say something by way of addressing the questions that have been raised or by way of their concluding remarks. Let me start in the reverse. Sandeep, if you have anything if you want to say.
No, I mean, I will let that one on success of market pass, because you said it very beautifully. My own view, of course, is if markets were to deliver justice, this is the result you will see. But anyway, that is a long debate. So I'll probably there are better informed and senior people here who can talk about it. I just want to go back to the ambassador and be very brief. It needs a longer debate that the time allows us today. But just to say that the desirability and the doability of it are two different aspects. What you said is obviously the idea of catching up with the North. One of the gentlemen here used the word catching up, and I'm just catching up with your word. Catching up with the North was always there, post-liberation of all of the southern globe. So to catch up with the North is a desire, and one of those aspects was catching up on this transition. It may be desirable, but is it doable is the point I was raising. And what are the challenges in its doability? Assuming we follow that path, how are we going to give decent wages to the 700 million people who are ousted today? So what sectors of economy would absorb it? To argue for decent wages for informal workers today, which is 18,000 rupees a month is what's been computed, is impossible. So, there's that aspect of limitation. The second side to it, there's an assumption in the world that peasant agriculture or small-scale agriculture is actually unfeasible, is actually a loss-making stuff, is actually a dead end. And I think that argument has been explored a lot. Small-scale peasant agriculture with modernization of some degree, with adequate public investment in the non-temperate areas, which means the tropic and the subtropics and diverse ecologies of the world, is pretty much feasible, is pretty much profit-making. What has really happened is we are throwing the baby and the bathtub together. The idea that fragmentation of land has led to, is an impossible thing, and therefore agriculture is a loss-making enterprise. One needs to examine why is it a loss-making enterprise. Agriculture everywhere in the world needs subsidies. So I'll leave it here because it's a much longer debate, and just leave it at the point of saying probably it's not doable, and probably that's not the catching up you wish to do. The autonomy of the South needs to follow a very different progress path than the model that the North has set itself to do, and that is where the question I raised of the Lucas report on possible use or possible following the model of inequality wealth sharing of the global North. In my thinking, is undoable. There are aspects which we can learn from, but there are aspects which remain as fundamental challenges in that direction. Yeah?
Thank you, Sandeep. Himanshu?
One can't answer all these questions, so just a one-line advertisement. Lucas is not going anywhere. He's going to present the same thing with a longer discussion at GNU from 3:30 onwards at Center for Economic Studies and Planning. Those of you who could not ask questions or still have questions to ask to Lucas can come at JNU. No. Public transport is available.
And Delhi does have public transport now. I don't know whether Dinesh Mohan will agree or not. Dr. Sen.
Yeah, I mean, just it's a little puzzled by Mr. Mahajan's thing, saying that we don't have entrepreneurship. You know, one of the things that I'm talking about the bottom of the pyramid. You know, one of the facts of the Indian economy is that we have 58 non-farm enterprises, 58 million. We have 72 million farms, which are also enterprises. If you add them up, you get 160 million enterprises, where you have 280 odd million households, which means that you have one enterprise for every 2 households in this country. No country even comes close, right? A lot of them may not be entrepreneurs. You may believe farmers are not entrepreneurs. I don't believe that. You may believe that this 58 million, these guys are really not entrepreneurs. They're scratching to make a living. All of that may be true. But to assume that we do not have entrepreneurship, I think, would probably be wrong. Now the question of growing, the issue is it their fault or is it a systemic failure which does not enable them to grow? Because then the reactions that you have are going to be very different. My submission is that it is a systemic failure and we simply have not applied our minds to this particular issue. The second part of it, which is this whole issue of catching up with the North. The notion of catching up is important. Catching up in what manner? Is it catching up in incomes? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it catching up in terms of economic structures? The fact of the matter is that too much focus is on the economic structures. And since you are a latecomer into the game, you may catch up to a certain point, but you will always be at the receiving end of whatever development is happening in those economies. The point is, can you think of alternative paths? Which again, in a sense, brings us to some of the issues you've raised, which is, can we think of agriculture? Can we think of environment as an economic asset? If so, how do we do it? The problem is we don't ask it. We get obsessed with catching up with the North, and we then say, we'll try to be where they were 30 years ago. It's not going to happen. The world has changed.
Luca?
Thank you very much. So I won't, unfortunately, be able to answer to all the questions, but following up on what Himanshu said, there is this more technical discussion in GNU this afternoon, and I very much invite all of you who can be there to discuss the more methodological details. Just one final point. In fact, going back to the question raised by the Oxfam representative, why are we not addressing this issue? Perhaps, for many years, years, there has been, because of the Kuznets curve, because of these, ideas on globalization and technological change, this idea that there was a deterministic rise in inequality. If you lift this assumption that no, it's not deterministic, that it is a matter of political choice or non-choice, then things can move forward in the right direction. So thank you very much for all these comments.
Thank you. I'm going to let discretion be the better part of valor and now not attempt to summarize any of the discussion, but just say a very warm thank you to Luca and to, in absent, to Piketty and the rest of the authors of the World Inequality Report, and for, as Dr. Ahluwalia said in the morning, and for partnering with ICRIER to launch the first World Inequality Report in India. And I hope that this will put the inequality agenda back on focus, not only in India, but I'm sure in other countries as well. And I also want to thank the panelists. I think they've done an excellent job. Dr. Sen, Himanshu, Sandeep, for coming here. They always come whenever ICRIER invites them. They're always here. Sandeep, it's the first time I have had the opportunity to hear you, but Dr. Sen and Himanshu have been here before, and it's always a pleasure to listen to them. And of course, warmly thank you to all of you to come, engage with Luca and the panelists. And this is certainly, as Nisha said from Oxfam, this is certainly not the end of it. Perhaps this is the beginning of our fight against inequality. And as I said in the morning, a little while ago, that ICRIER is also beginning to work on this subject. Thank you all very much, and invite you for lunch.
You're supposed to stand up.
Yes, yes.
Well, why don't you just push the chairs back
Yes,
and
yes.
or push the chairs forward? Yeah, break it. Very short. Utilities already.
Chair. Can you just, yeah, now it's. He wants to earn his. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mukul. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Sorry, I'm a bit. It was really good. I hope.
No.
So what is? Are you? Did they consult you on the FRB?